You're watching Euronews Now. I'm Takumbo Salako with your top stories. More than a dozen people have been killed in Kazakhstan's largest city as the insurrection against the government continues. A Russian-led peacekeeping force is heading to the country. Australian authorities have said no to Novak Djokovic, but a court will make a final decision on the tennis star's deportation on Monday. And we'll be asking how much US democracy is in danger a year on from the mob attack on the Capitol.
Dozens of people in Kazakhstan's largest city, Almaty, were killed overnight when attempting to storm government buildings, a police spokesman has announced. Authorities have now launched what they called an anti-terrorist operation in the city after protests broke out over fuel prices earlier this week. Peacekeepers from a Russian-led alliance are being sent to Kazakhstan after the country's president called on neighbours, who are members of the Collective Security Treaty Organisation, to help stabilise the unrest.
These terrorist gangs are international gangs. They have received extensive training abroad, and their attack on Kazakhstan should be viewed as an act of aggression.
Earlier, the president had vowed to take harsh measures to stamp out the violent demonstrations. Nevertheless, undeterred protesters stormed the presidential palace and the mayor's office, setting fire to both. The US and the United Nations have called for calm. Kazakhstan is considered an important country, situated in a strategic position. It has been under the rule of the same party since gaining independence from the Soviet Union in 1991.
Kate Millinson is an Associate Fellow in the Russia and Eurasia programme at UK-based think tank Chatham House. She says the protest movement is about much more than the recent rise in fuel prices, and that poses a major challenge for the government.
It's going to be very difficult for the government to address the myriad grievances that we see coming today, and those are both political and socio-economic in nature, but they relate to kind of long-term structural changes within the Kazakh political economy, which will be very hard to address in the short term. And so far, they haven't appeased the demonstrators in any shape or form. The other Central Asian states will be watching Kazakhstan very closely, but these countries, although they were all under the kind of post-Soviet yoke, they differ substantially from each other, and what we saw in Belarus is very different to what we see in Kazakhstan. And the main problem facing Kazakhstan today is the fact that over the last 30 years, the Kazakh government has decimated the systemic opposition, or any attempts to have a systemic opposition in the country. And so now this movement we see is very amorphous, it's very grassroots, and there is no leadership with which the Kazakh government can actually negotiate to try and quell the protests, to try and come to some agreement to stop the movements. But Russia is playing a key role in what is happening behind the scenes, particularly with the West and Russia at loggerheads at the moment. Kazakhstan is seen as one of Russia's key allies, and Putin and Nazarbayev, the first president of Kazakhstan, very much respect each other. And as we know, Putin loathes coloured revolutions, and he will not let this happen on his southern flank.
An Australian court will hear an appeal by tennis star Novak Djokovic on Monday after his visa was cancelled by the country's border police. The champion will not be deported before the inquiry, but he must remain at his Melbourne hotel. The 9-time Australian Open winner was granted a COVID medical exemption that would have allowed him to participate in the Games without a vaccine. Serbia's president, Alexander Vučić, has accused Australia of harassing the player.
Rules are rules, and there are no special cases. Entry with a visa requires double vaccination or a medical exemption. I'm advised that such an exemption was not in place, and as a result, he is subject to the same rule as anyone else. I also want to stress that ultimately this is the responsibility of the traveller.
It's believed the visa was revoked as the 9-time Australian Open winner and his team had provided insufficient evidence to back up immunity. Djokovic has not spoken about his vaccination status, but last year he said he was opposed to vaccination.
After a long night of heated debate, French MPs have voted in favour of a bill amending the country's COVID-19 health pass. The new legislation will bar unvaccinated people from much of public life. The National Assembly vote was delayed after President Macron sparked outrage when he said his strategy was to, quote, piss off the unvaccinated. His team said his comment was appropriate given the huge rise in new COVID infections.
When you talk to the French people today, many of them tell you that people who choose not to be vaccinated should not even be treated in hospital.
Italy is also seeing high infection numbers fueled by the Omicron variant, and on Wednesday the government backed a measure making vaccinations compulsory for the over 50s. It puts the country in the vanguard of Europe in cracking down on those who refuse to get an anti-COVID shot.
I think that mandatory vaccination should be extended to everyone, or at least to all adults, so I see it positively.
In the UK, on the optimistic side, there are changes to COVID rules for travel to England, with the scrapping of pre-departure tests and quarantine on arrival until the traveller has tested negative. For residents in England, the government's plan B on restrictions is to continue for 3 weeks. And in Germany, a shortening of self-isolation periods for key workers is being proposed. Those vaccinated can end isolation due to an infection after only 5 days with a negative PCR test.
Opinion is divided on French President Emmanuel Macron's comments on the unvaccinated. Some hail them as voicing what the majority of the public who are vaccinated agree with, while others deride them as needlessly divisive comments.
I want to bother the unvaccinated because in my family there are some who are unvaccinated, and for the moment I refuse to see them unless they do a self-test. I say he's right.
They didn't sell it to us like that. They told us it's 2 doses, and now it's 3, 4. I'm only going to do 2. After a while, enough is enough.
As the presidential election nears, Mr. Macron's comments have undoubtedly raised the political temperature, setting the stage for a heated contest. It will become apparent in the next few weeks if his remarks convince more to get vaccinated or convince fewer to get their booster.
In Spain, children praised them more than Santa. The 3 wise men paraded around cities of Spain with tight restrictions amid a COVID-19 surge in the country. In Madrid, a limited number of 7,000 people were allowed, and the kings were banned from throwing sweets to the children, which is a traditional part of the festivities. Capacity limits were not introduced in the Catalan region, but in Barcelona, participants from the age of 6 had to wear face masks. They were able to watch and greet the 3 wise men while keeping their distance with a mixture of excitement and hope, as most Spanish children received their Christmas presents during the night following their arrival. In other parts of the country, Melchior, Casper and Balthazar made a spectacular entrance by air or by sea. Last year, the traditional Epiphany celebrations were cancelled in most cities due to the pandemic.
1 year on from when the seat of US democracy, the Capitol building, came under attack as politicians inside confirmed the election win by Democrat Joe Biden over Republican Donald Trump. 5 people died, dozens were injured, and countless others were arrested. To mark the anniversary, President Biden is expected to honour the bravery of law enforcement on the scene and outline the unfinished work the nation needs to do to strengthen its democracy. Over the past year, there have been 2 ongoing investigations into who was responsible, an investigative congressional committee led by the Democrats and a criminal investigation. On the eve of the anniversary, the U.S. Attorney General urged patience with the justice process.
Good afternoon. As of today, we have arrested and charged more than 725 defendants in nearly all 50 states and the District of Columbia for their roles in the January 6th attack. In our criminal investigations, there cannot be different rules depending on one's political party or affiliation. There cannot be different rules for friends and foes, and there cannot be different rules for the powerful and the powerless.
Biden has been reluctant to talk directly about the man at the centre of the storm, former President Donald Trump, who is under investigation to see if he encouraged or even coordinated the violence. But Biden's aides say his speech will lay out the significance of what happened on the day of the worst assault on the Capitol since the War of 1812.
Well, let's get more now on the consequences of those momentous events at the US Capitol last year. We can hear the thoughts of Scott Lucas. He's a Professor Emeritus of American Studies at the University of Birmingham in the UK, as well as being founder of EA Worldview. Well, thanks for taking time to speak to us here on the programme. Let's just take a health check for a moment. How is President Biden doing on his mission to mend US democracy as well as reunite the country?
Well, at the level of walking the walk and getting things done, he's done pretty well. Look at the fact that you had the American Rescue Plan in March of last year to deal with the effects of coronavirus, both medical and economic, that he has gotten through a historic infrastructure plan to repair bridges, tunnels, roads, provide for broadband and climate change initiatives. And if it was not for the obstruction of the Republicans in the U.S. Senate, he would have gotten through the most important social and environmental budget in U.S. history since the New Deal of the 1930s. So there has been a return to joined-up government in Washington. The problem is that at the level of 21st century media and chatter, of course, you still get division rather than dialogue. You still get shouting rather than issues. And so you will continue to get these attacks on Biden from the Trumpists, including those who supported the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And you will continue to get leading Republicans, including the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, blocking almost any progress on important issues such as voting rights and voting access, just simply so they hope they can take Biden down and return to a majority in Congress and possibly the presidency in 2024.
There's no putting that social media back in the Pandora's box. But what about the events, or how have what have been the repercussions for U.S. democracy beyond the U.S. borders?
Well, I think you have got an ongoing challenge for American democracy, both at home and the way that it is seen in the world. But I think what Trump did is that he undid the repair effort for America at home and abroad, including that of the Obama administration, and he just ripped everything up, because it was not just a question of sort of an American flawed foreign policy. It was a question of Trump ripping up the entire U.S. system, the judicial system, the congressional system, the idea of a free press. And what has really carried America, as flawed as it has been throughout, well, the period since 1945, has been at least the idea that it could present a better system for Americans, and a system which said to others, look, at home, you can develop your own systems. I don't think America can impose itself on others, but it could provide an interaction, an idea that there is a better way. And Trump really stood in the way of that. And what January 6th did, look, if Americans could attack their own Capitol building, what kind of example can you set for the world when it faces its own challenges politically, socially, and economically in the middle of a pandemic?